You've arrived at CozySideAudio, where dreams begin with a story. Whether you're studying, journaling, or just chilling, this one's for you. If you vibe with this kind of content, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe for more.
CozySideAudio presents The Mic Check. Chapter 1. The First Joke. The first time Derek Hallam thought he might actually have something to say, he was sitting on an overturned milk crate in the back alley behind the warehouse, staring at the nicotine-stained sky and the smog-filtered sunset. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and he still had shipping labels glued to his arms from a day of taping boxes. All around him, forklifts beeped in slow, eternal rhythm, like a metronome for monotony. He pulled a wrinkled notebook from his jacket pocket. The cover had half ripped off weeks ago, but the pages inside were filled not with anything profound, just fragments of thoughts, scraps of conversations, overheard nonsense, and words that might someday become something. He wrote, "I think I peaked in middle school when my only responsibility was keeping my Tamagotchi alive." He stared at the line, then underlined Tamagotchi twice. It wasn't funny yet, but maybe it could be. He'd been watching stand-up clips on YouTube for months now. He'd fallen down the rabbit hole one night after work and never quite climbed out. There was something hypnotic about it, people walking up to a microphone, saying a few words, and making strangers erupt in laughter. They didn't look like stars. They looked like people who'd spent too much time thinking about life's dumb details, why grocery store carts always squeak, or why you never see a dog sneeze twice in a row. Derek admired that, the precision, the bravery, the control. He didn't tell anyone, of course. At 24, it felt stupid to say he wanted to do comedy. It sounded like saying he wanted to join the circus or be a magician. He could already picture the reaction, his coworkers laughing, the kind of laugh that came from disbelief rather than amusement. But still, he wrote. The warehouse was an industrial graveyard at night. After everyone clocked out, Derek stayed behind sometimes to clean up, not because he liked it, but because it was quiet. He'd stack empty pallets, sweep concrete dust into piles, and talk to himself testing lines, trying phrasing. It wasn't practice exactly, more like a conversation with no audience. He'd say things like, "You ever notice how every office fridge has one mystery container, like it's been there since the Clinton administration?" He'd chuckle at his own voice echoing against the corrugated walls, then immediately feel stupid. But there was something electric in the air after he said it, a kind of secret joy, like tapping into a frequency no one else could hear. When he got home to his tiny apartment, he'd throw his boots off, open his laptop, and fall down another comedy hole. Louis C.K., Nate Bargatze, Taylor Tomlinson, George Carlin, the greats. The way they made ordinary life sound extraordinary. One night he landed on an interview with a comic he barely knew, someone talking about how the best jokes come from writing what scares you. Derek clicked pause. That line lingered. So, the next day, on his lunch break, he tried. He wrote about his dad leaving when he was 14, about working jobs he hated because he didn't know what else he was good at, about how he laughed at everything, not because things were funny, but because he didn't want people to see he cared. Then he crossed it all out. Too serious, too revealing, too real. Still, something shifted. It started small. Tuesday nights, he'd walk past the Laugh Cellar, a small graffiti-covered bar with a crooked neon sign that buzzed like an insect. He'd pause outside, pretending to check his phone, while through the glass he could hear muffled laughter. The first time he stepped inside, he didn't even stay. Just ordered a soda, watched a guy on stage tell a story about being dumped via Venmo, and left before the set ended. But it lit something in him. The next week, he went back. Then again, then again. He started talking to one of the bartenders, a woman named Kira with purple hair and a voice like she'd been narrating dive bars her whole life. "You ever go up?" she asked one night. He shook his head. "Why not?" "I don't know. I don't..." do things. She smirked. You talk like someone who writes jokes in his phone at red lights. He didn't answer, but he smiled. For the next 2 weeks, Derek obsessed. He rearranged lines, timed pauses, trimmed words. He practiced while brushing his teeth, in the car, in the shower. He recorded himself and listened back on the way to work. Every time he'd change something, move a word, shorten a phrase, rewrite the setup. He realized comedy wasn't magic. It was carpentry. 1,000 tiny cuts until the thing held together. By the end of week 3, he had 3 minutes he didn't hate. Thursday night, he signed up. His hands shook as he wrote his name on the list. #14, Derek H. The host, a skinny guy in a vintage band tee, shouted jokes from behind a cracked mic, running through comics in rapid succession. Some were brilliant, some were unbearable, but all of them were brave. When his name was finally called, Derek stood up, legs heavy. The crowd wasn't really a crowd, maybe 9 people scattered across the room, half looking at their phones. But the light from the stage hit him like a spotlight in a dream. He took the mic. His voice trembled at first. Hi, my name's Derek. I work in shipping, which means if the world ever runs out of cardboard, I'm basically out of skills. A small laugh. Real. He exhaled. I realized the other day every job has a smell. Like teachers smell like dry erase markers, mechanics smell like WD-40, and warehouse guys smell like stress and mild regret. Another laugh. Bigger this time. He smiled without meaning to. He lost himself in the rhythm setup, pause, punch. For 3 minutes, the world narrowed to the light, the mic, and the laughter. When it was over, he blinked. Applause polite, not thunderous, but real. He stepped off stage dizzy, heart pounding. Kira handed him a glass of water. See? Not so bad. I think I blacked out. That's the good kind, she said. Means you gave a damn. Outside, he leaned against the brick wall, staring at the buzzing neon sign. It was half dead, the word laugh flickering between Lou and AF. He grinned. There wasn't some cinematic moment of revelation. No one told him he was destined for greatness. No scout handed him a card. But something about the night shifted the ground beneath him quietly, permanently. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. He took out his notebook, scribbled a line. They say laughter's the best medicine, which sucks because I can't afford health insurance. He laughed to himself, not because it was perfect, but because it was something. The night wind rustled the crumpled pages. He closed the notebook and whispered, "All right then." And just like that, without fanfare, without witnesses, Derek Hollum became a comedian. Chapter 2. The Rewrite. The morning after his first open mic, Derek woke up feeling like he'd run a marathon, not in the triumphant, look what I've achieved way, but in the, why do my legs hurt from standing still way. His throat was dry from talking into a dusty mic, and his voice rasped like he'd swallowed sandpaper. Still, he smiled. He lay there in the half-light of his apartment, the glow of his alarm clock bouncing off the ceiling, replaying every moment in his head, every pause, every laugh, every breath. He couldn't remember much of what he said, only the feeling, that brief, blurry rush when the crowd responded, when the silence broke and laughter filled it. He didn't know if it was good or bad. He just knew he wanted more. That night, he played the recording back. He'd propped his phone up on a salt shaker at the bar and hit record before going on stage, trying to catch the set. Now, through tinny phone speakers, he listened to his own voice stammer through jokes. It was excruciating. He flinched at every awkward pause, every botched punchline. His pacing was off, his tone flat. He didn't sound like a comedian. He sounded like a guy nervously talking to a group of people who were just polite enough not to leave. But the laughs were there, faint but real. That was enough. He took out his notebook, rewound the clip, and started writing notes. Pause longer here. Too wordy. Cut that tag. Rephrase setup. The page filled with arrows and crossouts until it looked like a war map. This was the part no one saw: the hours spent in silence, tweaking words that only existed for 5 seconds on stage. By week's end, he'd rewritten everything. He swapped warehouse guy for box monkey. Shorter, funnier. He changed the health insurance line 3 times before realizing the original was best. He learned that jokes lived and died by rhythm, 1 extra word, and the timing snapped. He started reading interviews with comedians, listening to podcasts where they dissected jokes like surgeons. Every time he thought he'd figured something out, he realized how much deeper it went. And comedy wasn't about being funny, it was about knowing why something was funny. He saw Marcus again one night at the Laugh Cellar, a guy in his 30s with a lazy confidence, wearing jeans and a baseball cap. Marcus had been doing open mics for 5 years and treated comedy like a second job that didn't pay. After Derek's set, Marcus slid onto the bar stool next to him. "You record that?" "Yeah." "Good. Now listen to it tomorrow. You'll hate it." "I already do." Marcus laughed. "Perfect. That means you care." They talked for an hour. Marcus broke down joke structure like he was teaching carpentry: setup, punchline, tag, misdirection, callback. "You build it like a chair," he said. "If one leg's off, it wobbles. People might still sit on it, but it won't feel right." Derek took notes on a napkin, half drunk on inspiration and cheap beer. Before leaving, Marcus said, "Don't chase laughs, chase the truth. The laughs follow that." Days blurred into a pattern. Work, write, perform, repeat. He'd wake up early, bleary-eyed, write for 30 minutes before work, then stand in line at night for open mics that started late and ran later. He learned that in comedy, time wasn't measured in minutes, it was measured in sets. One night he drove across town to a bar called Rusty's Tap. The place smelled like spilt whiskey and old wood. The stage was a wooden pallet propped on milk crates. He signed up, waited, watched 5 comics bomb in a row. When he finally went up, the audience was half gone. The bartender was counting tips. The sound guy was texting. Still, he did his set. The laughs were soft, but he hit every beat exactly how he wanted. When he got off stage, no one said anything, and that strangely felt like progress. Because it meant he wasn't chasing approval anymore. He was chasing precision. At home, his notebook multiplied. He had 1 for setups, 1 for punchlines, 1 for half-baked premises that might someday bloom into something. The floor became a sea of paper. His whiteboard above the desk read, "Observations jokes." Show don't tell, even in stand-up. Honesty, cleverness. He began analyzing the crowd as much as the jokes. What made them laugh? What kind of silence was good? And what kind killed momentum? He noticed that drunk audiences laughed louder but forgot faster. Coffee shop crowds smiled politely. The Sunday crowd at the bomb shelter, his new favorite spot, was the hardest to win. They were mostly other comics, cynical, half listening, but ruthless. He bombed there 2 in a row. No one laughed, not one sound. He walked home furious, replaying every word. Then, halfway home, he started laughing. It was freeing, somehow like taking a punch and realizing it didn't kill you. He went back the next week. It became ritual. Every Sunday night, he'd write new material, test it, record it, and dissect it Monday morning. He learned his voice, the way his tone dipped before a punch, the rhythm of his pauses. He found patterns. He learned that audiences responded most when he told jokes that were true. One night he tried a new bit. "My mom calls every day just to ask if I'm eating vegetables. I'm 24. I lie and say yes, then order mozzarella sticks. We're both pretending I'm healthy." It killed. Afterward, a girl from the crowd stopped him by the bar. That line about your mom that's funny because it's real, she said. Yeah? Yeah. You sound like someone I'd know. He went home buzzing. Not from her, though she was cute, but because she got it. She'd connected not to the joke, but to him. That's when he realized what Marcus meant. Comedy wasn't pretending to be funny. It was telling the truth until it got funny. He started carrying his notebook everywhere: grocery store, gym, bus stops. He wrote down overheard conversations, strange signs, passing thoughts. Sometimes he'd stop walking just to jot a phrase that might someday become a punchline. The world began to look different. Everything was potential material. He'd be halfway through stacking boxes at work and think, why do we call it a lunch break if no one's breaking from anything? It's just more sitting. He'd laugh to himself, write it down on the cardboard flap of a box, and tape it shut. At night, he'd test it. Some lines died immediately. Some hit like lightning. He learned to live for the lightning. It wasn't glamorous. His car smelled like stale fries and sweat. He lived on gas station sandwiches. He had dark circles under his eyes and permanent ink stains on his hands. But somewhere between all the late nights and rewrites, Derek started to feel different. Not confident exactly, but comfortable in his discomfort. Like he'd finally found a corner of the world that made sense, even if it made no sense to anyone else. The laughs became background noise. What mattered was the rhythm, the timing, the way his voice could fill a room for a few fleeting minutes and make strangers forget their own lives. He began to crave that silence before the first laugh, that moment of perfect uncertainty when anything could happen. One night, Marcus watched him perform again. Afterward, he nodded slowly. You're getting it. Getting what? The rhythm. You're not talking at people anymore. You're talking with them. Derek laughed. Feels like the same thing. It's not. One's about you, the other's about them. The trick is to make it both. Derek thought about that all the way home. That night he sat at his desk, surrounded by coffee cups and scribbled pages, listening to his newest recording. For the first time he didn't flinch. It still wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was honest, and that honesty sounded a little like music. He clicked off the light, staring at the quiet glow of his laptop. Tomorrow he'd rewrite again. The day after, he'd do it again. And the day after that. Because this, the grind, the self-doubt, the rewrites was the real show. The stage was just where he proved he'd been paying attention. Chapter 3. Open Mic Circuit. The first time Derek realized how deep the open mic world went. He was halfway through a 2-hour drive to a taco bar that hosted comedy every Tuesday. He'd found it on a Facebook page called Local Laughers Midwest Scene. The description said, 5-minute slots, no cover, bring friends. He didn't bring any friends. He didn't have the kind of friends who'd sit through 15 comics just to watch him talk about his mom's texts. The bar was in a strip mall between a pawn shop and a vape store. Inside, fairy lights dangled over the stage, and a cardboard sign read $3 tacos. 1 free joke, no guarantees. The audience was 4 people eating quietly. 2 of them were comics. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Every mic had its own ecosystem. The one at Rusty's Tap was a biker joint. Dark wood, bad sound, but a forgiving crowd if you leaned into chaos. The Velvet Bean Cafe was the opposite, a safe space for alternative comics who treated stand-up like performance art. The bomb shelter was infamous for silence. It was where comics went to test whether something was really funny or just funny in their head. Derek started rotating through them like stations on a radio dial. Each one tuned him differently. He bought a whiteboard and wrote them out by day. Mon Velvet Bean, Tui's, Taco Night, Cheap Gas. Wed Rusty's Tap, Thur's Bomb Shelter, Free Open. Set, write new material. Set, rest, never happens. Sun, listen, rewrite. He thought it'd be exhausting, but it became ritual, a rhythm that replaced the static of his old routine. Work, drive, perform, drive home, rewrite. At first, the other comics didn't talk to him much. He was the new guy, the quiet one. They'd nod, maybe mutter good set, and move on. But slowly, he started learning their names. Tina, a sharp-tongued barista with perfect timing and a mean streak that hid something tender. Ralph, who told the same joke every week, hoping one night it'd finally land. Gonzo, a chain smoker who looked 50 but claimed he was 36 and who treated the mic list like the stock market. Marcus, who drifted between rooms like a ghost, somehow always finding the bar with the cheapest beer. They were weird, broke, brilliant people who all chased the same fleeting noise, laughter. Some nights they bombed together, some nights they soared, but after every show, they stood outside under streetlights, smoking and talking about jokes like scientists dissecting alien tissue. How long should I wait before the punch? Depends on the crowd. What if there isn't a crowd? Then you're free, man. Derek listened more than he spoke, but each night he learned. He also learned the rules no one said out loud. Don't run long. Don't go after someone who just bombed and make fun of them unless you're close. Don't talk during someone's set. Don't steal jokes. And whatever you do, don't blame the crowd. Because even when the crowd sucked, it was never the crowd's fault. The veterans had a sixth sense for whether someone respected the stage. Derek wanted that respect more than laughs. One night at the bomb shelter, the host, a tall, sarcastic guy named Rico, pointed at Derek from across the room. You're up fifth, Halum. You ready? Always, Derek said, though his palms said otherwise. He went up with new material about his job. You ever realize warehouses are like therapy sessions? Everyone's pretending they're fine while lifting boxes full of regret. Silence. Then one guy in the back chuckled. Derek leaned in. Yeah, exactly. You've been there. The guy laughed harder. Then two more joined. The set built slowly, like a match catching after too many strikes. When he came off stage, Rico gave him a nod. Not a compliment, just acknowledgement. The kind of nod that meant you belong here now. It felt better than applause. Soon, Derek was driving hours for 5 minutes of stage time. He'd eat gas station food, rehearse lines out loud, then perform for strangers in dive bars where no one listened. He started noticing how comics measured time differently. They didn't say, "See you next week." They said, "See you next set." And there was this unspoken unity in it, like all of them were in on the same impossible secret, trying to make sense of the world through punchlines. At the Velvet Bean, he learned subtlety. At Rusty's Tap, he learned confidence. At the bomb shelter, he learned humility. But it was taco night that taught him resilience. That night, the mic was delayed an hour because the owner's nephew was having a birthday. When it finally started, the crowd was drunk, rowdy, and more interested in nachos than comedy. Derek watched comic after comic die on stage. When his turn came, he took the mic and said, "I can't tell if I'm performing at a comedy night or a hostage negotiation." The crowd actually laughed. Real belly laughs. He rode that wave for the rest of the set, throwing in improvisations, riffing on the room, forgetting the script. It was messy, but alive. When he left the stage, Marcus was at the bar, smirking. "See? That's it. You stopped trying to control it." "What do you mean?" "You're not a writer up there anymore. You're a talker." That phrase stuck with him. He was a talker now. And talkers didn't just write, they listened. He started watching crowds differently. The way people leaned forward when they liked a joke, the collective breath before a punchline landed, the rhythm of a drunk guy heckling. He realized comedy was music, but the audience was the instrument. He started recording not just his sets, but others. He'd play them back, listening for beats, timing, pauses. He became obsessed with silence, the space between the laugh and the next line. Silence, he discovered, was as important as noise. After a few months, he wasn't the new guy anymore. He was Derek Hollum, the quiet comic with the dry delivery and self-deprecating wit. People started greeting him by name. Some comics asked him for tags. It wasn't fame, not even close, but it was recognition. A small, sacred kind that said, "You've earned your spot in the room." And in the open mic world, that was everything. Then came the first triple. Marcus texted him. "Think you can hit 3 mics in one night? You're insane? You in or out?" Derek was in. They started at 7 p.m. at the Velvet Bean, then rushed across town for Rusty's Tap, and ended the night at the Bomb Shelter, each set shorter than the drive between them. By the third show, his voice was hoarse, his legs numb, but something had changed. The repetition was sharpening him. Each time he did the same joke, it got cleaner, funnier, tighter. By midnight, he was buzzing not from adrenaline, but from momentum. They sat in the parking lot afterward, eating gas station burritos, their laughs echoing in the dark. "This is it, man," Marcus said, looking out at the empty street. "This is comedy, not the Netflix specials. This, the miles, the grind, the burritos." Derek nodded. "Yeah, feels right." He didn't know if he'd ever make it big, but for the first time in his life, he didn't care. He was part of something real, raw, and alive. And when he finally got home, too wired to sleep, he wrote one more line in his notebook. "Every laugh is a map. Keep following it." Chapter 4. 5 minutes. Derek didn't expect anything to change that night. He didn't expect to feel good or even confident. He'd done enough of these sets to know better than to believe in sudden miracles. Usually the only thing that changed between one performance and the next was how long it took before the audience started checking their phones. But something was different this time. He couldn't name it, couldn't identify when the shift happened. It was just there, subtle but real. Like walking into a room you've been in 100 times and realizing someone's moved the furniture 2 inches to the left. The venue was a place called the Hollow Brick, small, underground, the kind of club that smelled faintly of beer, bleach, and ambition. The stage was barely elevated, with a single spotlight that made every comic look slightly haunted. There were 12 people in the audience, maybe 15 if you counted the bartender and the guy fixing the neon sign in the corner. And yet, as Derek stood backstage with his notebook tucked in his jacket pocket, he felt something close to calm, or maybe not calm, just ready. The set was 5 minutes long. He'd rehearsed it 100 times. He knew the timing, the rhythm, the pauses. It was personal, more personal than anything he'd tried before. The first bit was about his mom. He used to joke about her coupon addiction because it was easy material, big stacks of paper, grocery store chaos, double discount absurdities. But tonight, he went deeper. He talked about how she'd once driven across town just to save 60 cents on laundry detergent, and how that was the moment he realized being broke wasn't just a temporary thing, it was a mindset. That joke had been sitting in his notebook for weeks, marked with a question mark. It had felt too raw, too specific. But when he said it tonight, people got it. They didn't laugh at her. They laughed because they saw their own parents in her. Then came the bit about his job at the grocery store. He told the story of a customer who'd asked if organic water existed, and another who'd once tried to return a watermelon because it was too wet inside. It was stupid, but real. The laughter came early and grew fast, and for once, Derek didn't flinch under it. He leaned into it. He could feel the rhythm in his bones. The air between punchlines wasn't empty. It was alive, pulsing with anticipation. He shifted into his closer, a short story about anxiety. It was honest, almost painfully so. He told them about waking up at 2 a.m., convinced he'd left the stove on, even though he hadn't cooked in days. He told them about trying to meditate, only to spiral into a panic attack because he was focusing too hard on breathing. The audience lost it. Not in a roaring, out-of-control way, but in the quiet, knowing laughter that happens when people recognize themselves in your story. For the first time, Derek wasn't performing at them. He was talking to them. And in that strange, sweaty little club, surrounded by strangers sipping warm beer, it felt like communion. When he stepped off stage, his hands were still shaking. Not from fear, but from something else. Something like relief. He sat on a folding chair near the back, breathing in the sound of the next comic's set. The room smelled like dust and cheap whiskey. A girl at the bar laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't his. A couple of comics gave him the subtle nod, comedian's shorthand for "you did good." He didn't need more than that. No applause could have meant as much as that nod. After the show, Derek walked home. The city was still buzzing, that late-night hum of cars and neon and distant conversations that always made him feel like he was walking through someone else's dream. His jacket smelled like the bar. His throat was sore from talking too loud. He didn't care. He thought about all the nights that had led up to this one. The nights where he'd stood in front of 5 drunk guys yelling, "Do the Tinder joke again." The nights where silence had stretched so long between punchlines, he could feel it pressing against his chest. Those nights had hurt, but now, standing at a crosswalk with his notebook in his pocket and a grin he couldn't suppress, he realized what they'd done. They'd built him. Every blank stare, every failed tagline, every desperate rewrite in a coffee shop at midnight, it had all led to this. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that worked. He got home just after midnight. His roommate was asleep on the couch, the TV still playing reruns of The Office on mute. Derek tiptoed past, dropped his bag by the door, and collapsed into the desk chair in his room. His notebook sat open, 6 pages marked with pen scratches and arrows. He flipped to the one labeled 5-minute set and stared at the messy handwriting. Mom Coupon's Mindset. Organic Water Real Conversation. Anxiety Breathing Panic. He smiled. Then, beneath the last joke, he wrote in small, neat letters. It took months of silence to earn 5 minutes of laughter. He didn't even realize how true that line felt until he saw it on the page. He woke up the next morning to sunlight slicing through the blinds and his alarm blaring at 7:30 a.m. Back to work. He stood behind the grocery counter, scanning items, trying not to let the tedium erase the high he was still carrying. Every beep of the register felt like a quiet reminder that his real life was still on pause. But that night had changed something. When customers complained or made small talk about the weather, he listened differently. He heard rhythm, phrasing, material. Every exchange was a potential bit. "You know," a customer said, "you look tired." "Yeah," Derek replied without thinking. "I'm working on my tired cashier face. It's the only one that matches the uniform." She laughed, a real laugh, and he smiled. Because that's what it was now. A constant search for small truths that made people laugh. That night after work, he went back to his notebook. The adrenaline from his last set had cooled into focus. He started refining what worked, cutting the fluff, tightening the language. He changed, "My mom loves coupons" to "My mom's religion is coupons," moved a punchline up 2 sentences. Hours passed. He didn't notice. By the time he closed his notebook, the clock read 2:14 a.m. His eyes burned, his back ached. and still, he couldn't stop smiling. A week later, he performed the same 5 minutes again, this time at a different bar, the Laughing Pig. It didn't hit quite as hard as before, but the laughs were there, the rhythm was there, and most importantly, he was there, present, unflinching, finally feeling like he belonged on that stage. He didn't need validation anymore, not from crowds, not from comics, not even from himself. Just the work. The slow, steady climb. The understanding that every 5 minutes of laughter cost him weeks of doubt and 1,000 small failures. And maybe that's what made it beautiful. Because for the first time in his life, Derek wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing truth and finding it piece by piece in the quiet between punchlines. That night, before bed, he recorded a note into his phone. His voice sounded rough, tired, still carrying the rasp of too many late nights and open mics. 5 minutes, he said softly. That's all it takes. But you've got to earn it, every single second. He clicked save, tossed the phone onto his nightstand, and lay back. The city murmured outside, cars passing, distant laughter echoing through the alley. He closed his eyes and let it fade. Tomorrow would be another shift, another open mic, another night of chasing that elusive rhythm again. But for now, he'd had his 5 minutes. And that was enough. Chapter 5. Bomb Shelter. The first time Derek stepped into the bomb shelter, he realized immediately it was nothing like he expected. He'd imagined dim lights, the low hum of anticipation, maybe a few friendly faces eager to laugh at the new guy. Instead, there was chaos. A smell somewhere between spilled beer and burnt popcorn, neon lights buzzing overhead, the faint sound of an electric guitar drifting from a side room where someone was apparently practicing, and everywhere, people talking over each other, a dozen conversations collapsing into one chaotic drone. When he told Marlene he'd accepted the hosting gig, she raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? Hosting is a different animal. You'll spend half your time being a janitor, the other half being a referee. The rest is negotiating egos. Yeah, Derek had said. I can handle it. Exposure, right? Exposure, right. The word sounded small when it came out of his mouth now, drowned out by the din of the bomb shelter. His first night as host, he arrived early, trying to find the sweet spot of authority. He leaned against the wall, clipboard in hand, rehearsing his opening lines. Welcome to the bomb shelter, he muttered quietly, the safest place for your drunk jokes and bad decisions. He tried it again, louder this time. Welcome, everyone, to the bomb shelter. It sounded better. Still, not perfect. He glanced around. There were 10 chairs at the bar, 4 small tables, and a standing area that barely fit a dozen people. Some early comers were already there, claiming stools, sipping cheap beer. Derek spotted the bartender, a tall guy named Rick with a permanent scowl and a tendency to mutter at patrons who laughed too loud. Rick gave him a small nod, one step closer to respect, Derek thought. He checked the lineup. 3 regulars tonight, plus 2 new comics. One of the regulars was Pete, a lanky guy who treated the stage like a throne and the audience like subjects. Pete's ego could crush most newcomers, and Derek had already read the warning signs. The smirk, the slow stretch of the neck, the way he surveyed the crowd as if they were cattle. Derek cleared his throat. Time to start. Welcome, everyone, to the bomb shelter, he said into the mic. His voice was steadier than he felt. I'm Derek Hallam, your host for the night. We've got a great lineup if they survive the drinks and the insults. Laughter. Some real, some polite, enough to keep him going. The first challenge hit almost immediately. The crowd was restless, drunk in spots, loud in others. One guy shouted, I want to joke about my ex. Derek paused, blinked, considered explaining that nobody gets to dictate comedy, then shrugged and said, "Sorry, man. X jokes are reserved for Tuesday nights. Try again then." Crickets. Derek forced a laugh. "All right, let's get started." And he dove in. The night unfolded like a trial by fire. Derek learned quickly that hosting wasn't about being funny yourself. It was about controlling the room. Timing became a weapon. When a comic's joke fell flat, he had to know how long to pause before stepping in with encouragement, or how to toss a comment that would steer the audience back into laughter without seeming like he was rescuing them. Pete went first. 10 minutes of crowd-pleasing, self-indulgent humor. Derek clapped along with the audience, trying not to grimace. A few patrons rolled their eyes. Derek took mental notes. How Pete commanded attention, how he timed pauses, how he dealt with hecklers by laughing along rather than snapping. Next, the newbies. One stammered, another bombed outright. Derek found himself standing beside the stage, leaning forward, murmuring, "Take your time, it's okay," until he realized the sound carried. The room quieted just enough. The audience gave tentative chuckles, a small victory. By the midpoint, Derek's brain was buzzing with things to manage, keeping track of set times, juggling drinks, keeping Pete's ego inflated while protecting the newbies, and making sure the microphone didn't squeal. A girl in the back shouted, "You suck!" Derek's reflex was to laugh, which made the room laugh with him, which turned her insult into part of the show. Another lesson learned. Owning the room meant everything was potential material. By the third hour, Derek realized he was sweating under the lights, not from exertion, but from concentration. He was balancing crowd psychology, comic egos, and timing, and realizing just how much stage presence really mattered. Every pause, every smile, every glance had a purpose. If he leaned too far forward, it could seem aggressive. Too far back, and he was invisible. It wasn't all chaos, though. There were moments of clarity, like when a comic accidentally stumbled over a joke and Derek had to step in, riffing off the misstep. The audience laughed harder than they had at the original joke. Derek felt the thrill of improvisation, the moment when quick thinking saved the set. Or when a drunk patron tried to heckle him directly. "Host, tell a joke," the man slurred. Derek didn't flinch. He leaned into the mic, calm, measured. What do you get when you mix a confused drunk guy with a microphone? An improv masterclass, starring you. Laughter. Real, warm laughter. The guy laughed too, half embarrassed, half delighted. Derek realized that hosting gave him a different kind of power than performing. He wasn't just telling jokes anymore. He was orchestrating them. Timing, tone, rhythm. Winning back a dead room. Reading the energy in the room and nudging it where it needed to go. By the end of the night, his arms ached from gesturing. His throat was raw. His legs had memorized every step from the bar to the stage, but he felt a new kind of triumph. Not the fleeting thrill of a good laugh, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of commanding a room. He stepped outside into the cold night air, taking a deep breath. The street smelled of fried food, damp concrete, and city life. It was almost comforting. The chaos of the club still echoed in his head. He knew he'd be back tomorrow night, maybe in a different venue, facing a different crowd, but he also knew he'd survive it. Because the first step wasn't being funny. The first step was surviving the chaos. And Derek Hallam was learning. One night, one set, one chaotic audience at a time. Chapter 6. Write, rewrite, repeat. Derek woke up to the sound of his alarm blaring like a warning signal he didn't deserve but had willingly signed up for. It was 5:47 a.m., and the city outside his window was still dark, mist curling over streetlights like smoke from a distant fire. He reached over to silence it, letting the first twinges of regret creep in. Why he was doing this again? Oh, right. Comedy. Fame. exposure, or maybe just the dumb thrill of making strangers laugh at the chaos in his head. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and reached for his notebook, which was always at his bedside now. It had become an extension of himself. Lines, half-jokes, scribbled observations, arrows connecting thoughts in a language only he fully understood. The page was messy, but that mess had its own rhythm. He flipped to a page labeled New Bits, for real this time, and read through last night's scribbles. The first was about the guy at the grocery store who treated the cash register like it was a confessional booth. I've sinned, but at least the bananas were organic. The next was a riff about public transportation, and how people were like emotional landmines in those tiny metal boxes on wheels. He muttered each one quietly to himself, testing pacing, imagining the pauses, the inflections, the audience reactions. A laugh here, a chuckle there, a pause for suspense. He scribbled edits in the margins, words crossed out, rewritten, underlined. By 7:15, he was dressed and out the door, coffee in hand, headphones in, recording himself on the way to his day job. The drive was 30 minutes, enough time to run lines out loud, to hear how the words sounded without the comfort of silence. "People are so dramatic on buses," he said into the phone recorder, trying a new cadence. Like one delayed stop and suddenly they're auditioning for Survivor Metro Edition. He listened to the playback, winced at the inflection that didn't work, tried again, sped it up, slowed it down. 30 seconds later, he had 3 versions of the same joke, each slightly better, or at least slightly different. He saved all 3. None of them were perfect. None of them needed to be yet. Work was a blur. Derek's mind wandered through setups, punchlines, and taglines between ringing scanners and customer questions. The guy who asked if organic water existed yesterday? Derek had already reworked a 10-second routine in his head for him. He laughed quietly to himself, dodging the suspicion of his co-worker. Lunch was another writing session, this time in a corner of the park behind the grocery store. The sun shone weakly. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and exhaust. He typed on his laptop, occasionally scratching lines into his notebook when the battery died. He tried a bit about online dating, how every bio was a lie, but the lies were usually the truth someone wanted you to believe. It wasn't a complete joke yet, just a spark. He scribbled notes about pacing, timing, and gestures he might use. At 3:47 p.m., he realized he hadn't stopped thinking about the set for more than 30 seconds in the last 7 hours. He closed the laptop, exhaled, and tried to read a book. But even the plot of the novel bled into setups. He saw every character as a potential joke, every dialogue as material for a crowd. Night fell, and Derek was back at the Hollow Brick, performing a different set from the one that had given him his first 5 minutes. Tonight he was experimenting, trying lines he hadn't dared before. "Dating apps are the Costco of disappointment," he said, pacing slightly. A few chuckles, encouraging. Swipe left, swipe right. Endless aisles of people who think pineapple on pizza is a personality trait. Bigger laughs. Good. He noted it in the margins of his notebook. Timing was off by a beat. Pause longer next time. He tried another about office life, how cubicles felt like padded cages for modern humans. Bomb. Silence. Dead. His stomach sank. He had rehearsed this joke hundreds of times. On paper, it was gold. Live? Nothing. He paused, glanced at the back row. 2 people on their phones, 1 asleep. He felt the heat rise, panic, desperation. Then, without thinking, he riffed. Maybe they're just meditating on my failures. Laughter. Real laughter. The dead room revived. He smiled, grateful, stunned. 1 offhand riff, a minor tweak, and it landed. After the set, he collapsed into a chair at the bar, sipping flat beer. Notes everywhere, pages crumpled, phone recording the audio he would analyze later. Every night was like this, writing, rewriting, performing, analyzing, adjusting, repeat, repeat, repeat. He remembered Marlene's words from the start. Comedy isn't about the laughs, it's about the work. Now he understood. Every blank stare, every forced chuckle, every silent pause wasn't failure. It was data, input, feedback, fuel for the next round of writing. He opened his notebook again and started a new page, heading, Ideas from Tonight. Bus landmines, Costco of disappointment, office cubicle cages. He scribbled furiously, connecting lines, moving phrases, crossing things out, rewriting setups mid-sentence. His hand cramped. He didn't care. Hours later, he left the club, his notebook heavy in his bag. The city smelled of rain and asphalt. Streetlights glimmered on wet pavement. His phone beeped with a reminder. Wake up in 6 hours to write more. Derek smiled, walking home slowly, notebook clutched like a talisman. This was what it meant to commit, to push, to keep going even when exhaustion threatened. And the next day, he'd do it all over again. Wake up, write, commute, perform, rewrite, obsess. Because tonight had reminded him that every failed joke, every bombed bit, every pause too long, it was all worth it. One riff, one spark, one moment of laughter could redeem the entire night. And maybe, if he kept at it, the next spark would last 10 minutes. Chapter 7. The Tape. Derek had never liked seeing himself on camera. The first time he'd watched footage of himself performing, it was at a friend's insistence. He'd squirmed on the couch, coffee forgotten, fingers tapping nervously against the armrest as the opening moments of his set played back. And immediately, he hated it. His voice sounded too high. His gestures looked awkward. That pause he'd practiced 100 times? A disaster. He cringed, trying to imagine why anyone would laugh at this. Why he would laugh at this. So when Marlene's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Elaine, told him he needed a tight 10 for the showcase, Derek froze. You mean, film it? He asked. Yes, Elaine said, chewing gum. If you want them to consider you, we need a recording. 10 minutes. Tight, professional, clean. No dead spots. Derek blinked. 10 minutes. On tape. He left the cafe where Elaine had handed him the note and wandered the streets, feeling like the entire city had suddenly grown to enormous proportions. 10 minutes. One single take could ruin everything he'd been building. One moment of silence, one awkward gesture, and the tight 10 would become his obituary. He spent the next week like a man possessed. The notebook became his Bible. He wrote, rewrote, rehearsed, and then wrote some more. He recorded his voice on his phone while walking the streets, played it back on loop in the subway, and muttered punchlines into the bathroom mirror at home. Every day had the same rhythm. Write, test, edit, obsess, panic, rinse, repeat. He even tried filming himself on his laptop one evening, using the webcam like it was a spotlight, imagining the audience on the other side of the screen. The first take ended after 30 seconds. He couldn't stop glaring at his own hands. They moved like wooden sticks. His smile was a grimace. The second take lasted a minute before he deleted it in disgust. By the fourth attempt, he was shaking. Sweat collected at his hairline, fingers trembling as he hit record. He had a plan. He would start with a short anecdote about his mom, pivot to grocery store absurdities, then land on a refined anxiety joke he knew landed reliably. The transitions were polished, the punchlines sharpened. And yet, nothing felt right. The recording day came. Derek set up in his tiny living room, his laptop on a makeshift tripod, a single desk lamp angled to provide flattering light. He wore the same dark shirt he wore for almost every show now, thinking uniformity might make him look more professional. He pressed record. The first joke tumbled out. Pause, smile, gesture. The second joke. Disaster. He forgot the punchline halfway through. Flushed. Tried to improvise. The joke fell flat. He stopped, swallowed, rewound the camera, and started again. By the fifth take, he was exhausted. Voice hoarse, throat raw, body tense. He watched the playback. His timing was off. The gestures still felt robotic. Every laugh cue in his head was silent. And then it hit him. This wasn't performance anymore. This was self-judgment. Every movement, every inflection, every pause was scrutinized by a stranger in the form of his own eyes. He felt sick. He didn't sleep well that night. The next morning he barely got out of bed, notebook on his chest. Every line he'd written seemed like it belonged to someone else. Every joke that had once made him feel alive now felt hollow. It wasn't that he didn't know how to be funny. It was that he'd started expecting the camera to agree with him, and it didn't. By Tuesday, he had spent a week obsessing over the 10 minutes. He could recite it in his sleep. He could perform it with his eyes closed. But on tape, on the cold, unblinking surface of the laptop screen, it was just him, and he didn't know if that was enough. The breakthrough came in a moment of exhaustion, sitting cross-legged on the floor, head in his hands. He muttered to himself, voice barely audible. What if I just do it? Stop thinking, stop critiquing, just be. He tried it again. No fancy lighting, no scripted pauses, just him, his notebook at his side, and the tiny living room that had been a stage 100 times before. He stumbled a few times. He paused awkwardly. He laughed at his own mistakes. And somehow, it worked. The 10 minutes weren't perfect. Far from it. There were dead spots. A few jokes didn't land. But it was honest. And for Derek, honesty was enough. He sent the video to Elaine. She watched it in her office the next day, arms crossed. Derek imagined her critique. Too long, too short, not tight enough. Instead, she smiled. Good. Not perfect, but honest. That's what they want. Derek blinked. Honest? That sounded like permission, like a lifeline thrown into the storm of his own self-doubt. It wasn't the showcase. It wasn't the validation he dreamed about. It was a beginning, a benchmark, a record of the work he had put in, and the work he would continue to put in. That night, Derek went out to the hollow brick to perform his set, live, unrecorded. He felt lighter somehow, freer. Mistakes didn't matter now. Laughter came easier because it was about the room, not the camera. Timing felt natural. Gestures felt natural. He was there, fully there. And for the first time, he understood that perfection wasn't the goal. Truth was. Connection was. Finding a rhythm that made people laugh while staying true to himself was everything else. He walked home under the faint hum of streetlights, notebook in hand. The city was quiet. His apartment was waiting. His laptop blinked silently. Tomorrow, he would record again. Rewrite, rehearse, repeat. But tonight, for the first time, Derek Hallam allowed himself to be satisfied. Not with applause, not with recognition, not with fame. Satisfied with progress. Satisfied with honesty. Satisfied that he had done the work and survived it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. Chapter 8. Laugh Lines. By late summer, Derek had finally stopped flinching when his name was called. The stage no longer felt like an execution platform. It was a room, a pulse, a mirror, and he was learning how to live inside it. His early sets had been frantic bursts of energy, all punchlines and pacing like a man running from silence. But lately, something had shifted. The jokes weren't just jokes anymore. They were extensions of him. His breath synced with the crowd's rhythm. His timing, once mechanical, now flexed with the ebb and flow of attention. It was subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but it was there. The calm between thoughts, the small pauses where laughter could grow roots. It started with one bit about grocery store self-checkouts. He was riffing one night at the bomb shelter, running through new material, when he tossed out a line about how scanning bananas shouldn't make him feel like a criminal. It was stupid, barely a thought, but it killed. He leaned into it, stretching the absurdity. How the machine always accused him of unexpected item in bagging area, how it felt like the world's most passive-aggressive breakup. People laughed not because it was clever, but because it was true. That night, something clicked. He began looking inward. Not for trauma. He wasn't ready to bleed on stage, but for honesty. He started writing about the small humiliations of adulthood, forgetting laundry in the washer, pretending to understand office group chats, the quiet panic when someone asks, "How's everything going?" and you say good, even though you're halfway to falling apart. He found rhythm in that everyday unease, humor in the hesitation. Audiences leaned closer, laughed harder, not out of pity, but recognition. He wasn't trying to be funny at them anymore. He was funny with them. "Man, that bit about pretending to text so you don't look lost?" a stranger told him after a set. "That's me every damn day." And Derek smiled, not performatively, not out of pride, but out of something gentler. Connection. He didn't know the guy's name, but for a few minutes on stage, they'd shared the same nervous heartbeat. At home, his notebook had become a battlefield of ink and margin notes. He'd cross out lines with surgical precision, adding arrows, underlines, quick sketches of ideas that felt alive. Sometimes, he'd stare at a single joke for hours, changing one word, then reading it aloud to the empty room. "The pause is the punchline," he muttered to himself one night, pacing the floor. "Don't rush the laugh. Let it breathe." He was discovering something sacred in that timing, how silence could be a tool, not a failure. One night at a small downtown lounge, the host asked if he wanted to close out the show. "You've been consistent lately," she said. "Crowd'll be warm by the time you're up." He agreed, heart pounding harder than it should have. When his turn came, he stepped into the light, took a slow breath, and began with a line he hadn't planned. "You ever realize most of adulthood is just improvising confidence?" The audience chuckled. He smiled, eased into it. "You just wake up one day and everyone expects you to know how to budget, fix a sink, cook something that doesn't involve microwaves. And somehow, we all just agree not to ask questions." Laughter rose, rolled, then softened. He could feel it. How they were with him now, not watching, but riding the same invisible wave. After the show, Benny clapped him on the shoulder. "Dude, that opener, improvising confidence, that's a keeper." Derek shrugged, still dazed from the adrenaline. "Didn't even write it down, it just came out." "That's the best kind," Benny grinned. "That's when you stop thinking and start speaking truth." The truth. That word stuck with him on the drive home. Comedy had started as armor, a way to dodge failure, to hide behind cleverness. But now it felt like a lens, something to see through, not hide behind. When he talked about loneliness, people didn't tense up. They laughed because they understood. When he joked about fear, they weren't uncomfortable. They related. And maybe, he thought, that's what comedy really was. Not an escape, but a translation. Turning pain into language, and then laughter. A few nights later, he found himself back at the bomb shelter, sitting at the bar, watching another comic on stage bomb spectacularly. The audience groaned. Someone coughed. The comic stumbled through his set. Derek didn't feel the usual pity or schadenfreude, just empathy. He knew that flailing feeling, that desperate scramble to find footing in the dark. He smiled softly to himself and whispered, "Keep going, man." That night, he went home, opened his notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of a clean page. Comedy isn't about being funny. It's about being real and surviving the silence in between. Then, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to perfect it. He just let it be. In the dim light of his desk lamp, Derek stared at the scrawled words and smiled. Not the nervous, approval-seeking kind, but the kind that comes from finally recognizing your own reflection. He was no longer chasing laughs. He was learning to listen to them. And somewhere in that exchange of breath and sound and truth, he realized he'd stopped running. Chapter 9. Green Room. Derek never thought the words "you're opening for a touring comic" would arrive in an email addressed to him. The message came from Ron at the Laugh Den, a half-legit club tucked behind a vape shop on the edge of downtown. He'd been emailing Ron for months, sending clips, checking in, gently pestering like every other comic desperate for a slot. This time, though, the reply wasn't a polite, "We'll keep you in mind." It was 4 words that felt like a punch to the chest. "You free next Saturday night?" The email said the headliner was a guy named Terry Hallow, a road comic with a couple of late-night credits and a reputation for working clean. "He's doing a short tour before filming something," Ron had written. "We need someone local to do 10 up front. You've got the right tone for the crowd." Derek read it 5 times before believing it was real. He even checked the address to make sure it wasn't one of his friends pranking him. Then he sat at his desk, staring at the screen, heart racing, until his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Marcus, you look like you saw a ghost, man. What happened?" Derek: "Opening for Terry Hallow." Marcus: "No effing way." Derek: "Way." Marcus: "Don't choke." He laughed out loud, then immediately stopped, the nerves already setting in. The Laugh Den wasn't much to look at. From the street, it resembled a defunct laundromat, blacked-out windows, flickering neon sign that just said "Comedy" in tired pink letters. But once you stepped inside, the air changed. That mix of beer, dust, and old carpet that somehow felt sacred. He arrived 2 hours early, because of course he did. The place was mostly empty, the only sound a dishwasher clanking somewhere in the back. The stage lights were on, a single stool in the center, microphone coiled like a sleeping snake at its base. Ron waved him over from the bar. "Hey, Derek, right? Glad you made it." He was mid-40s, bald, wearing a headset for no reason. "Terry's running late, but he'll be here. You nervous?" "Trying not to be." "Good. Don't be. They're a nice crowd?" "Suburban. They like setups and clean punchlines. No politics, no trauma dumps." Derek smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, got it." Ron leaned in, lowering his voice. 10 minutes tight, okay? No crowd work unless you're dying up there. Keep the energy up. And don't forget to plug next week's open mic before you hand it off." He nodded. "Thanks. Appreciate it." Ron gave him a half smile. "This is a good look for you, kid. Don't overthink it." The green room was smaller than he'd imagined. Basically a storage closet with a couch that looked rescued from a dorm. Posters for past acts covered the walls. Some names crossed out, others signed in faded Sharpie. The air smelled like sweat, deodorant, and stale Red Bull. 2 comics were already there when he walked in. One, a stocky guy with a notebook full of scribbles, was pacing like a boxer before a fight. The other, a woman in her 30s wearing wireless earbuds, scrolled her phone in total silence. "Hey," Derek said, awkwardly stepping in. I'm Derek, the opener." The pacing guy stopped and grinned. "Nice, I'm Rick. Feature, you working clean?" "Yeah, mostly." "Good. Terry hates raunchy openers. Got booed once in Des Moines. Because the guy before him did 5 minutes about bowel movements. Oh, Derek said. Noted. Rick laughed. You'll be fine. You look like the type of comic moms like. Derek wasn't sure if that was a compliment. When Terry finally arrived, it was like watching a professional athlete walk into a pickup game. He had that calm presence, confident without trying, cracking jokes as he set down his bag. The room seemed to settle around him. Hey folks, Terry said, shaking everyone's hand like he'd known them forever. You must be Derek. Yeah? Derek said, trying to sound casual. Good stuff, man. Saw your clip Ron sent me. Funny, real voice on stage. Keep it loose tonight, don't rush. Thanks, Derek managed. Terry smiled knowingly. First opener spot? Yeah. You'll remember it forever, trust me. And Derek could tell he meant it not in the corny mentor kind of way, but like someone passing down a small truth he'd learned the hard way. Showtime snuck up faster than expected. 1 second, he was sitting in the green room, rereading his notes. The next, Ron was waving him toward the stage. All right, kid. You're up in 5. Breathe, smile, and for God's sake, don't trip on the cord. He waited just behind the curtain, listening to the muffled crowd chatter, the low hum of anticipation, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loudly. The MC's voice boomed through the monitors. All right, folks, your first comic tonight is a local guy who's been working hard all around the city. Give it up for Derek Hollum. Applause. Not thunderous, but warm. He stepped out into the light. Something shifted the second he hit the stage. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe habit, but the lights, the mic, the murmur of strangers waiting to laugh, it all felt like home. He started with a small, self-deprecating bit about his name. How Hollum sounds like something you shout at a goat. It landed. Then he moved into his familiar material about his mom texting him recipes for when comedy fails, his old job at the grocery store, the weird confidence of people who ask for bagels, untoasted please. I like the texture of raw dough. The laughs came steady. Real laughs. Not the pity kind, not polite chuckles. The kind that ripple through a crowd, build on themselves. When he hit the final punchline, he didn't want it to end. But he rapped, thanked the crowd, and walked off to the sound of honest applause, the kind that vibrates in your ribs. Rick met him at the curtain. Dude, you killed. Nice work. Thanks, Derek said, still catching his breath. Terry clapped him on the shoulder. Told you. You'll remember it. After the show, Derek sat in the green room again, the room quieter now except for the faint thump of music from the bar. Rick was gone. Terry was taking pictures with fans out front. He stared at the wall of posters again. Hundreds of names. People who'd stood where he was sitting now, some probably famous, most forgotten. His hands were still shaking, though not from nerves anymore. It was something else, a weird cocktail of adrenaline and clarity. For months, comedy had been this idea, this dream he was chasing from open mic to open mic. Tonight, it had felt like a job. Not in a bad way, just real. When Terry came back in, he looked exhausted but content. He sat down across from Derek, grabbed a bottle of water, and said, You did good tonight. You've got instincts. You listened to the crowd. That's rare. Appreciate that, Derek said. You make it look easy. Terry laughed. That's the trick. It's not easy. It just looks like it is. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly. You'll find out the road's long, but if you can survive the small rooms, the bad nights, the long drives, you'll earn your laughs. And that's the good stuff. Derek nodded. He didn't have a clever response. Just that feeling in his chest, the quiet realization that this wasn't the finish line. It was mile 1. Outside, the night was cool and still. The street lamps buzzed. His car smelled faintly of fries from a bag he'd forgotten earlier that week. He sat there in silence for a while, his phone buzzing with texts from Marcus. "How'd it go?" "Dude, answer me. You dead or famous?" He smiled, typing back slowly. "Still alive? Kinda both." He drove home with the windows down, the sound of laughter still echoing faintly in his ears. Not from the crowd, but from the part of him that for the first time believed he belonged here. Chapter 10. Dead Air. For about a week after the laugh den, Derek walked like someone who'd discovered a new gravity. He didn't strut, he wasn't built for that. But there was this subtle shift, this small rhythm in his steps that came from having done something real. He'd gone up in front of a crowd that didn't owe him a laugh and earned every single one. Even his reflection looked different when he brushed his teeth, same face, but with a small private grin that said, "I did it." Marcus noticed immediately. "You got that post-show glow," he said when they met at their usual coffee shop. "Like somebody who just got promoted but doesn't want to jinx it." "I'm trying to keep it humble." "You're failing." Derek laughed, taking a sip of his lukewarm Americano. "It was just 10 minutes, man. I'm not suddenly Seinfeld." Marcus raised a brow. 10 minutes at a real club. That's more than most of these guys ever get. Enjoy it. He wanted to. He really did. But even as Marcus talked, Derek's mind was already turning toward the next thing, the next set, the next 5 minutes of material, the next chance to prove it wasn't a fluke. The next few weeks blurred into a grind. Every night, some different basement, some bar with flickering lights and a sticky floor. He'd show up with his notebook and his half-cold bottle of water, wait 2 hours to do 6 minutes, then drive home at midnight replaying every line in his head. At first, it felt like forward motion, like he was climbing something invisible, rung by rung. But slowly, the laughs started thinning out. It began with small crowds Tuesday nights at a pizza place where the mic stood between the soda machine and the bathroom. Half the audience was comics waiting their turn. The other half was people eating pepperoni slices and trying to ignore him. His jokes landed like soft pitches in an empty field. Then there were the louder bars, where people talked through the sets, ordering wings, laughing at private jokes louder than anything happening on stage. He'd power through, gripping the mic like it could anchor him, forcing smiles while the laughter came late or not at all. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was when people smiled, but didn't laugh that faint, polite expression that said, "I see what you were trying to do there." He hated that more than bombing. By week 3, it felt like every set was cursed. He'd written a bunch of new stuff stories, longer bits that came from real experiences, but on stage, they always came out wrong. Too wordy, too slow. The punchlines thudded instead of popped. He could hear himself tightening, rushing through the setups, talking faster like he could outrun the silence. At the Boiler Room, a basement club that smelled like burnt nachos, he did a 5-minute set that should have killed. It had worked twice before. But that night, nothing. No laughs, no energy. Just the hollow ring of his own voice bouncing off the walls. He got off stage, heart pounding, trying to laugh it off. Rick, the feature comic from the Laugh Den, happened to be there. He clapped him on the back. "Rough crowd, huh?" "Yeah," Derek said. "Must have been." Rick smirked. "Or maybe it's just Tuesday." That night, Derek lay awake staring at the ceiling, running through every line in his head, hearing the empty pauses between them. He thought about deleting the whole set from his notebook. He thought about taking a week off. He thought about what it would feel like to just stop. By the 4th week, the confidence was gone. Every show started with dread. He'd sit at the bar waiting for his name, pretending to text, trying not to imagine how badly it would go. Even when he did okay, when the room gave him a few chuckles, it didn't feel like enough. The laughter wasn't filling anymore. It just highlighted how empty the rest of his day felt. Marcus caught him one night outside the Rusty Nail, a dive that hosted open mics in the corner of its pool hall. "You look like someone canceled Christmas," Marcus said, lighting a cigarette. "Bad set." "How bad?" "The kind of bad where people smile at you like you just dropped your lunch tray in middle school." Oof. Derek leaned against the wall. "I don't get it, man. I was doing great. Then suddenly I'm back to square one. Every set's dead. I keep thinking I just need better material, but maybe I'm just not—" He didn't finish. Marcus exhaled smoke into the cold night air. "You ever think maybe this is what it is?" "What?" "The cycle. You get hot, then you suck. You bomb, then you get hot again. Everyone needs silence, bro. It's part of the process." Derek frowned. "That sounds like something people say so they don't quit." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." The next morning, Derek sat at his kitchen table, staring at his open notebook. The pages were a mess half-crossed out jokes, arrows linking one punchline to another, doodles in the margins. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's corkboard. He wrote something new. "Silence is the real crowd." Then crossed it out immediately. Too pretentious. He tried again. "Maybe comedy's just talking until people like you." Crossed that out too. Too sad. He sighed, closed the notebook, and went to make coffee. The kettle whistled like it was mocking him. That weekend, he performed at a brewery downtown, one of those trendy spots with long tables and string lights and craft beers named after puns. The crowd was young, chatty, full of people on first dates. The host introduced him as a local comic who's been lighting up mics all around the city, which only made him feel more fraudulent. He opened with an old reliable bit about his mom texting him memes of Jesus with captions like, "He died for your Wi-Fi signal." It usually worked. That night, it got a single laugh from the bartender. He switched gears mid-set, reaching for newer stuff, trying to find the rhythm. Nothing. His voice cracked on a punchline. Someone coughed. Then the silence stretched like an open wound. For the first time in months, he felt the panic he used to feel back when he was brand new, that cold rush of, "Oh no, they hate me." He rushed through the closer, thanked the crowd, and got off stage to polite applause that sounded like pity. In the green room, the feature comic, a wiry guy with a ponytail, gave him a sympathetic nod. "Tough room, man. They just want to flirt and drink. Don't take it personal." "I'm not," Derek lied. He drove home in silence, radio off, headlights slicing through the rain. By Sunday, he hadn't written anything new. The notebook stayed closed on the kitchen table. His mic bag sat untouched in the corner. Every time he thought about another set, he felt sick, like his body was rejecting the idea. Marcus texted, "You coming to O'Malley's tonight?" "Nah, taking a break." "How long?" "Don't know." 10 minutes later, Marcus called. "You really skipping?" "Yeah. What's the point? I keep bombing." Marcus laughed softly. "And that's what we do." "I'm serious. Maybe I peaked at the Laugh Den. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's as good as I get." "Dude," Marcus said, "you think you're special? Every comic bombs, every single one. You think Terry Hallow didn't eat it for years before people knew his name? Come on. I don't know if I can keep chasing laughs that don't come." Marcus paused. "You're not chasing laughs, man. You're chasing truth. The laughs just tell you when you found some." That shut him up. He went for a long walk that night. No headphones, no destination. Just moving through the quiet suburban streets, past sleeping houses and dim porch lights. He thought about every bad set, every polite smile, every awkward silence. It hurt not because of ego, but because he cared, because he'd found something that made him feel alive, and now it was betraying him. But Marcus was right. This was part of it. The silence, the failure, the doubt. They were just different rooms in the same club. You had to walk through all of them to get to the good one. A few nights later, he showed up to O'Malley's again. Marcus grinned when he saw him. Look who decided to bomb again. I'm a glutton for punishment. He signed up, got slot number 7. The crowd was thin, 10 people, maybe 12, a couple at the bar, a group of comics pretending to care. Perfect. He went up with no expectations, no pressure, just a mic, a beer, and 5 minutes to breathe. He started with something new, something he'd thought of during his walk. You ever notice how silence has a sound? Like not total quiet, more like the noise your brain makes when you realize you just said something stupid at a party. A few laughs, real ones. Encouraged, he kept going about overthinking, about the voice in his head that narrates every bad decision, about how stand-up is basically paying for therapy by the minute. By the time he hit his closer, the crowd was leaning in, not roaring, not clapping, but listening. It felt different, better. When he finished, the applause was small but honest, and he realized something as he walked off stage. He wasn't chasing laughs anymore. He was learning how to talk to silence, how to make peace with it. Later that night, sitting in his car, he recorded a quick voice memo. Note to self: failure isn't proof you're bad. It's proof you're trying. Everyone eats silence. It's how you come back that matters. He smiled, clicked save, and sat for a moment with the engine off, the street light flickering above him. Somewhere inside, the noise quieted. For the first time in weeks, he felt okay. Chapter 11. The Workshop. The flyer looked harmless enough white printer paper taped to the bulletin board beside the coffee counter at Roost Grind, its corners curled like wilted petals. Comedy writing workshop, share material, get feedback, build your voice, Thursdays, 7 p.m. Derek almost walked past it. He was there to pick up a coffee before heading to the bomb shelter, already late for hosting duties. But something about the word voice stopped him. He stared at it longer than he should have, his reflection faint in the glass door. That word had haunted him since the start. Voice. Every comic talked about it like it was some sacred thing you either found or you didn't like a soul. He tore off one of the little paper tabs with a phone number on it. The first night he went, he expected something formal, maybe a lecture setup, maybe a guy with a PowerPoint about joke mechanics. Instead, it was 6 people in the back of an old bookstore, surrounded by leaning towers of used novels and the faint smell of dust and espresso. A string of Christmas lights sagged over the group, giving the room a kind of unbothered charm. "Hey, man," a guy in a denim jacket greeted him, waving from the circle of mismatched chairs. "You the new one?" "Guess so," Derek said. "I saw the flyer." "Cool. Grab a chair. We're just going over setups that bombed." The group laughed, that kind of self-deprecating chuckle that came from shared humiliation. Derek sat down, clutching his notebook like a shield. The guy in denim, who later introduced himself as Lance, was mid-story about a new bit he'd tried about therapy. Another comic, a woman named Jess, interrupted him halfway through. "Okay, but you're giving away the punch too soon," she said, waving her pen like a conductor. "Make them fill in the silence a little, build the tension." Lance groaned. "So you're saying I'm too eager to make them laugh?" "Exactly. You're trying to impress them, not talk to them." That line stuck in Derek's head for the rest of the night. He went back the next week, then the week after, and then every week after that. It wasn't glamorous. There were no cameras, no stages, no lights, just a circle of people throwing around ideas, picking apart word choices, sharing open mic horror stories. But something changed for Derek. For the first time, comedy wasn't about surviving a room or chasing approval. It was about craft, about seeing how a single misplaced pause could derail a setup, or how one honest detail could turn a chuckle into a gut laugh. The group started to feel like a second home. One night, Jess handed him her notebook and said, "You're too clean, Hallam. You write like you're afraid to bleed." Derek frowned. "That's dramatic." "It's true. You're good at setups, but where's the vulnerability? Who are you under the punchlines?" He didn't answer. He just took the notebook, flipping through pages of half-finished ideas and sketches. He realized she was right. Most of his jokes were about surface things: traffic, dating apps, caffeine addiction. All fine, all funny, but none of them his. They were generic mirrors, safe reflections of the world. That night, when he got home, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the glow of his laptop screen, reading old notes, and started typing something new. He wrote about his dad, about how they didn't talk much anymore, how silence between them felt like an unpaid debt. Then, about his first job at the car wash the guy who'd humiliate new hires by soaking their socks with a pressure hose. Then about being broke, chasing a dream that paid in drink tickets and pity applause. He didn't think any of it was funny. Not yet, but it was honest. The next workshop, he read one of those pieces aloud. It was awkward at first, too serious, too confessional. But then Lance said, "The part about your dad where you say you keep waiting for him to call so you don't have to, that's darkly hilarious, man." Someone else added, "Yeah, it's the kind of truth that sneaks up on you." Derek blinked. "So, keep it?" Jess grinned. "You polish it, don't sand the edges off, leave the splinters in." He left that night with a strange mix of pride and fear-pride for writing something that mattered, fear for what it said about him. Outside the store, rain slicked the pavement. The group scattered, laughing and waving goodbye, some heading to nearby open mics. Derek lingered under the awning, his breath visible in the cool air. He realized he'd started to crave the grind, the feedback, the invisible progress that only revealed itself weeks later when something finally clicked on stage. Over the next few months, the workshop became his lab. Hot. They'd meet every Thursday, huddled between stacks of forgotten paperbacks. One night they'd debate the ethics of self-deprecating humor. Another, they'd dissect why a pause can be funnier than a punchline. They argued. They bombed together. They became better together. Sometimes, when the store owner locked up late, they'd all move to the 24-hour diner across the street. Greasy fries, warm mugs, and long tangents about comedy philosophy. "Do you think stand-up's therapy?" someone once asked. Jess shook her head. "No, it's surgery. You cut yourself open so the audience doesn't have to." Derek didn't say anything, but he understood exactly what she meant. By early spring, his act started changing. He'd still open with a quick observational bit to ease the crowd in a joke about people who clap when planes land, or how everyone becomes a financial expert during tax season. But then he'd pivot. He'd talk about loneliness not in a self-pitying way, but in a way that made people recognize themselves, about how adulthood feels like juggling knives while pretending you're not bleeding, about how we all carry our insecurities in silence, waiting for someone else to admit it first. Crowds leaned in more. Laughs hit deeper. He stopped trying to sound like a comedian and started sounding like himself. At the bomb shelter, Marcus noticed. "Something's different," Marcus said after one of Derek's sets, wiping down the bar. "You used to come up here swinging, trying to prove you belonged. Now it's like you're letting the jokes breathe." "Yeah?" Derek said, smiling faintly. Marcus nodded. "You trust the silence now. That's growth." Derek took a sip of his drink, looking out at the empty tables where laughter still seemed to echo faintly. "Feels weird, man. Like I'm finally getting good, but also realizing how far I still have to go." That's the job, Marcus said, raising his glass. We never arrive. We just keep driving. The workshop eventually decided to host a small showcase just for friends, local comics, and anyone who wanted to see what they'd been working on. They called it Draft Night. Derek volunteered to go last. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he wanted to listen. He watched as everyone before him took the stage, Lance's awkward charm, Jess's razor-sharp delivery, the quiet newcomer who nailed a story about their grandmother's dating app profile. Then it was his turn. The lights felt warm. The audience was close intimate. He started with a new piece, one he'd been refining for months, a story about how he'd once tried to fix a broken lamp instead of buying a new one, comparing it to how people try to fix broken relationships just to prove they can. It wasn't flashy, but it was true. The laughter built slowly, organically, and when it finally rolled through the room, full, genuine, connected, he felt something deeper than applause. Belonging. Afterward, Jess hugged him. That's the most honest you've ever been up there. Thanks, he said. I was terrified. Good. Keep being terrified. That's how you know you're not faking it. Later that night, he sat alone in his car, notebook open on the passenger seat, rain pattering against the windshield. He thought about how far he'd come from scribbling jokes in the dark to peeling back layers of himself in front of strangers. He realized the laughter wasn't the goal anymore. It was the connection that shared, fleeting understanding that made the grind worth it. The next morning, he woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and opened a blank page in his notebook. He wrote 3 words across the top. Don't hold back. And for once, he didn't. Chapter 12. Spotlight. The email subject line read, Booking confirmation, The Crescent. For a long moment, Derek just stared at it. He was standing in his kitchen, half-eaten cereal going soggy in the bowl. It didn't seem real. The Crescent was the venue, the kind of place comics mentioned with quiet reverence. Legends had stood on that stage. The floorboards, rumor had it, still hummed with their echoes. 10 minutes later, he was pacing his apartment, phone pressed to his ear. Dude, you're opening there, Marcus said. That's insane. I've been trying to get 5 minutes at that place for years. 10, actually, Derek said, half laughing, half hyperventilating. They said 10. Marcus let out a low whistle. All right, hotshot. That's a real gig. This isn't a dive bar or a basement with Christmas lights. You're stepping into the big leagues now. I know. You ready for that? Derek looked around his apartment, the cluttered notebooks, the empty coffee mugs, the stack of voice recorder tapes from late-night practices. I think so, he said, though he didn't entirely believe it. The days leading up to the show blurred together in a feverish haze of preparation. Every morning started the same. A pot of black coffee, a notebook, and an hour spent rewriting jokes he'd already rewritten 10 times. He trimmed, shifted, and rearranged. Whole paragraphs were scrapped. He timed himself again and again until the beats of each bit felt like the rhythm of a familiar song. Then came the practice runs in front of mirrors, in his car, even walking through the park with earbuds in, pretending to take phone calls while actually working on pacing and delivery. He played recordings of himself while doing dishes, while brushing his teeth. He winced every time he heard himself rush a line or pause too long. By the 3rd day, he felt like a boxer shadowboxing against his own nerves. He texted Jess. Got the Crescent gig, 10-minute slot. Her reply came a minute later. Congrats. Don't overthink it, just tell the truth. That became his mantra. When showday came, Derek woke before dawn. He couldn't stop running lines in his head. Every syllable felt fragile, like it could collapse if touched the wrong way. He spent the morning pacing, muttering through his routine, then sat on his couch staring at the clock for what felt like hours. He ate half a sandwich and abandoned it on the counter. By 6, he was at the Crescent. The place was even more intimidating in person. A narrow hallway led to the green room, where faded posters of touring acts covered the walls. The low hum of conversation from the audience bled through the door hundreds of people, maybe more. He met the host, a veteran comic named Serena, who'd been around since the early 2000s. She had that unbothered calm of someone who'd seen everything twice. "You Derek Hallam?" she asked, flipping through a clipboard. "Yeah," he said, voice a little too high. "Relax," she said with a grin. "You're up 4th. Crowd's warm tonight. Don't rush your opener." He nodded, clutching his mic like it might run away. Backstage, time moved differently, a mix of quicksand and lightning. The first act went up. Laughter roared, then faded. The second comic stumbled a bit, but recovered. The third crushed with an energy so loose and natural that Derek almost wanted to run. Then Serena turned to him. "You're up." His stomach dropped. He stepped toward the stage. The lights hit him hot, sharp, unflinching. The room blurred. All he could see were vague outlines of faces, the front row leaning forward expectantly. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then muscle memory took over. He opened with a small conversational joke, the kind of soft landing he practiced 100 times. Something about how people clap for airplanes when they land, but never for the person parallel parking in a busy street. It got a laugh, a real one. The tension in his chest loosened. He moved into the next bit, then the next. Each line fell into rhythm setups like inhale, punchlines like exhale. The room became alive, pulsing with energy that felt almost physical. The laughs didn't explode so much as build, layer after layer, like a wave catching momentum. Halfway through, he shifted into newer material, the pieces he'd workshopped in that cramped bookstore, the ones that cut closer to the bone. He talked about his dad again, about silence, pride, and the weird way men apologize by fixing things instead of saying the words. Then about being broke and pretending he wasn't, trying to look like he had it together when his socks had holes in them. The laughter didn't come as quick this time, but when it did, it was deeper, more connected. He wasn't performing anymore. He was talking. 8 minutes in, he could feel it, that strange electric flow state where everything clicked. The audience breathed with him. Every pause was deliberate, every glance, every lean into the mic perfectly timed. For the first time, he wasn't chasing laughter. He was riding it, guiding it. When he landed his closer, a story about accidentally heckling himself in a dream, the laughter broke like a wave and rolled for several seconds before the applause swelled in. He stood there, blinking through the light. The sound wasn't just loud, it was alive. Back in the green room, Serena clapped him on the shoulder. "That was tight work," she said. "You've got presence, kid. You make them lean in. That's rare." He grinned, shaking his head. "I almost threw up before I went on." "Good," she said. "Means you care. When you stop feeling sick, you're doing it wrong." The other comics gave him nods of acknowledgement. Not envy, not flattery, just quiet respect. It felt like currency. He sat down, heart still hammering, hands trembling around his water bottle. For the first time in months, he let himself breathe. After the show, he stepped out into the city night. Cool air brushed against the heat still radiating from his skin. The streets buzzed with late-night energy neon reflections rippling across wet pavement, laughter spilling from nearby bars. He checked his phone. Messages were pouring in. Marcus had texted, "Heard you killed. Told you the Crescent would be your spot." Jess wrote, "See? Told you. The truth always wins." He smiled, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. He didn't go celebrate. Instead, he ended up at a small diner a few blocks away, ordering coffee he didn't need and staring out the window at the lights of passing cars. He replayed the night in his head, the silence before that first laugh, the weight of the spotlight, the way the audience had shifted from strangers to something else entirely. He realized he hadn't felt happy, exactly more like right. Like all the nights bombing in dive bars, the hours rewriting setups, the lonely rehearsals in front of a cracked mirror, it all added up to this one moment. And not because it was perfect, but because it was earned. When he finally got home, it was past 2 a.m. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his bag, and sat on the edge of his bed. The adrenaline still pulsed in his veins, but underneath it was something quieter. Satisfaction. Not the kind that screamed, the kind that whispered. He opened his notebook. The last page still had those 3 words from weeks ago. Don't hold back. He smiled and scribbled beneath them. It worked. Then, after a pause, but it's only the beginning. He closed the notebook, set it aside, and lay back, staring at the ceiling until sleep finally took him, mind still buzzing with the laughter that lingered long after the lights went down. The next morning, the world didn't look different. His phone wasn't ringing off the hook. He wasn't famous. There was no manager waiting with a contract. But his coffee tasted better. His jokes felt sharper. His purpose clearer. He'd tasted the real thing, not the illusion of success, but the truth behind it. And now, he couldn't stop chasing it. Chapter 13. Mic check. The applause from the Crescent still echoed somewhere in Derek's head. It had been a week, maybe 2, but the sound would surface at odd times when he was microwaving leftovers, when the train doors hissed open, when he woke up before his alarm. He didn't feel famous. He didn't even feel successful, but he felt seen. And then, like any good comic, he immediately started worrying about what came next. The morning after the Crescent show, he got an email from a guy named Richie. The subject line read, "Saw you at the Crescent, interested in booking?" The body of the email was short. "We're starting a weekly showcase at the Lantern. 10-minute slots paying $75 a night. Small room, good crowd. Let me know if you're available next month." Derek blinked at it. He'd been paid in drink tickets for nearly a year. $75 felt like an absurd luxury. He replied yes before even reading the date. When he showed up at the Lantern 3 weeks later, the venue was exactly as Richie had described: small, warm, and slightly crooked, with a low ceiling and a stage barely raised above the first row of tables. There was a framed poster of an old George Carlin show on the wall. He stood in front of it, adjusting his mic stand, and thought, okay, let's see if that magic can happen twice. It didn't, not quite. The crowd was fine, polite, engaged, but distant. He ran his Crescent set again, but something was off. The rhythm felt slightly wrong. The pauses stretched too long. The laughs came late, softer, scattered. Afterward, Richie patted him on the shoulder. "Good stuff, man. You got chops? Crowd was weird tonight, that's all." Derek nodded, but inside he knew better. The set hadn't been bad, but it also hadn't been alive. It was like singing karaoke to his own material. He walked home that night, hands deep in his jacket pockets, and realized something important. That high from the Crescent wasn't something you held on to. It was something you had to earn again. The next morning, Derek sat at his kitchen table with his notebook open. On the page, he'd written, "New set, new voice, no autopilot." The lines stared back at him. For a few minutes, he didn't move. Then he started writing. He didn't think about punchlines or applause breaks or pacing. He just wrote what he wanted to say. About the weird in-between of adulthood, too young to have figured things out, too old to keep pretending that's normal. About the fear of plateauing. About how success, when you finally get a taste of it, doesn't feel like a door opening. It feels like another hallway with more doors you don't know how to open. He wrote until the coffee went cold. A few nights later, he went to an open mic on the east side, a tiny backroom bar called Murphy's, known mostly for its sticky floors and an audience of 6. The sign-up list was half full. He scribbled his name in the 7th spot and ordered a club soda. He didn't tell anyone about the Crescent show. Didn't mention the new booking at the Lantern. It wasn't about status tonight. It was about the work. The comics before him ran their sets, some funny, some painful, all familiar. There was comfort in that, the repetition, the grind. When his name was called, Derek walked up, adjusted the mic, and said, "Hey, I'm Derek Hallam. I've been thinking about plateaus lately." A few people chuckled softly, unsure if that was the setup or the punchline. He smiled. "Not like mountains. I'm not outdoorsy enough for that. I mean those emotional plateaus. The ones that feel like you're moving, but you're not actually going anywhere." Someone in the back laughed, not a big laugh, but real. He kept going. For the next 5 minutes, he worked through new material looser, quieter, more honest. Less about clever turns and more about rhythm, about the way truth landed when wrapped in humor. Some jokes hit, some didn't, but he didn't care. This was the space he loved most, the low stakes, the freedom to fail, the intimacy of 6 strangers breathing the same air, waiting for something funny to happen. When he finished, the applause was small but genuine. He thanked them, stepped off stage, and felt something that surprised him. Peace. That night, he went home, dumped his keys on the counter, and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop and imported the audio recording from his phone, the new set from Murphy's. The file name autofilled, openmic_03_17.wav. He renamed it miccheck_01. Then he hit play. His own voice filled the room, shaky at first, then steadier. He listened like a stranger might. He jotted notes, circled pauses, wrote too long here and good laugh there. By midnight, the notebook was full of arrows and scribbles. He felt more alive than he had after the Crescent. Because the writing, the refining, the endless tinkering, this was the real work. The fame, the applause, the validation, they were all just echoes. What mattered was the mic, the notebook, and the next set. A few days later, Marcus called. "Yo, I saw a clip of your Crescent set floating around. Someone filmed it." "Really?" Derek said, startled. "Yeah, got like 1,200 views on some comedy subreddit. People dig your stuff." "That's wow." He didn't know what to say. "You should ride that wave, man. Post more clips. Build the following." Derek laughed. "I don't even have a tripod." Marcus chuckled. "Then get one. You've earned some traction. Don't go all mysterious artist on us now." "Maybe," Derek said, smiling. But in truth, he wasn't sure he wanted to chase algorithms. What he wanted was reps, real ones, the kind that didn't trend but lasted. On Friday, Derek returned to the Lantern for another 10-minute slot. The crowd was better this time, half tourists, half locals, all a little tipsy but open-hearted. He tried a mix of new and old material, testing transitions, tightening bits. Something clicked midway through a rhythm, a connection. Not quite the Crescent, but close. Afterward, Richie clapped him on the back again. "You're steady, man. That's what gets you booked. Consistency." On the subway home, Derek thought about that word, consistency. And that was the thing no one told you about chasing a dream. It wasn't just talent. It wasn't luck. It was showing up again and again, even when no one noticed, especially when no one noticed. That weekend, Derek spent all of Saturday writing. He spread notebooks across his floor like blueprints. each one filled with half-formed jokes, scribbles, and arrows connecting punchlines to new ideas. He brewed coffee, put on an old Bill Burr special in the background, and started mapping out his next set. There was a rhythm to it, an invisible current. Write, read, laugh, cross out, rewrite. At some point, he noticed the afternoon light shifting through the blinds, the dust floating in the air like static. He smiled. There was nowhere else he wanted to be. Later that evening, he set up his cheap phone tripod, the one he'd finally bought after Marcus's call, and hit record. He looked into the lens, testing lighting and angles. "Mic check," he said. The words felt like a ritual now, a promise to himself. He started running through his new material about growing up, about watching your parents age, about how adulthood is just a long series of you pretending to know what you're doing until someone calls you out. He stumbled a few times, laughed at himself, and kept going. The footage wasn't perfect. The lighting was off, his delivery uneven, but it was real. When he watched it back, he smiled at the imperfections. They were proof of progress. That night, he went for a walk. The city was cooling down from spring heat, the streets humming with distant laughter and sirens. He passed a small bar hosting an open mic. The chalkboard outside read, "Comics 5 minutes each. Sign up inside." He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, listening to the muffled laughter spilling out the door. He thought about going home. Then he thought about all the nights he'd spent rehearsing alone, all the jokes that started as scribbles in a notebook. He smiled, walked inside, and added his name to the list. When his name was called, he climbed onto the tiny stage, gripping the mic with both hands. The crowd was small, maybe 10 people, but they looked up at him with open curiosity. He took a breath. "Hey, I'm Derek," he said, "and I think I'm starting to understand something about why we do this." The audience leaned in. He smiled a quiet, genuine smile and began. The jokes flowed easy. The room laughed where it mattered. He felt relaxed, present, content, not chasing the high anymore, living in it. When the set ended, the applause was soft but sincere. He thanked them, stepped down, and sat back, feeling lighter. Back home later, Derek opened his laptop. He queued up the latest recording. He labeled the file, MicCheck_02. The waveform pulsed on screen, jagged peaks of laughter, valleys of silence. He watched it for a long moment, then hit play. His own voice filled the room again. He smiled, leaned back in his chair, and listened. There was no fame, no spotlight, no roaring crowd. Just the sound of him doing what he loved, chasing truth one laugh at a time. When the track ended, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. He closed the laptop, picked up his notebook, and wrote on a fresh page, "Keep going." Then he grabbed his mic bag, his jacket, and stepped out into the night, ready for another room. Another 5 minutes, another chance to begin again.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.